What's up YouTube, this is Demkeys back again with another Unity tutorial, and today I'll be teaching you about the new UI tools that have been introduced in Unity 4.6. Well, 4.6 beta. It's not the final product, but Unity decided to release this so that people would have a chance to test their UI tools. Now because this topic is so big, I won't be able to cover the entire thing in one video, so I'm going to divide it into a few parts. I still don't know how many parts, but I'll keep adding more parts as required. In this part, we'll be learning how to use the following elements: canvas, panel, button, text, and image. Alright, now before we actually start, let me tell you a few things that I noticed that have changed since Unity 4.5. For one, there's a new Rect tool over here. This will help you change the height and width of the UI elements. Don't confuse this with scaling. I'll show you the difference in a while. Next, the game object menu. It's changed. I think it used to be create other, and now everything it's branched out even more. You have 3D object, 2D object. I think they're gonna add more items to this. I'm not sure. Audio, light, UI, of course that was required. Particle system and camera. I never really paid attention to these options, so I don't know if these were there before or not. Then what else? Okay, if I remember anything I'll let you know. So let's begin. Now currently in our scene we have a plane. Let me zoom in. Yes, currently in our scene we have a plane, a capsule, a point light, and a main camera. Let's add some UI elements. Any UI element that you're going to add into the scene has to be placed inside a canvas. If you don't have a canvas over here in the hierarchy, or well in the scene, then you can create one or just let Unity create it for you. So you can create it like this and then add, let's say, a button. Or you don't need to create the canvas yourself. You can just try and create a button and the canvas is automatically created along with the button and also an event system. The event system basically handles input, things like clicks or button presses. It can handle standalone input and touch input. Standalone input would be things like the keyboard and joysticks, etc. So let's go a little deeper into the canvas. Now the canvas has three render modes. Screen space overlay. This basically means that this canvas is going to be displayed at the top regardless of what is there in the scene. This canvas is going to be placed on top of everything else. So let me, for example, add a panel and add a few more buttons. Now when I play the game, you can see our UI is showing up over here and the buttons are here. Regardless of where you have placed this canvas in the scene, it's going to show up on your screen. This render mode has a sub option called Pixel Perfect. This it just makes the image more sharp. I don't know if you'll be able to notice it over here or not, but there's a very fine difference. In certain cases it makes the UI elements really sharp. Next, screen space camera. This is useful uh, when you want a certain canvas to be rendered by a certain camera. So you might have more than one camera in your scene, and you might want one camera to render a certain canvas and not the other cameras to render it. This is very useful in cases where you want to apply camera specific settings. Let's see an example. We have our main camera here. I'll select the canvas and drag main camera into render camera. As you can see, the canvas has been placed within the view of the camera. I think they call this a frustum. I'm not sure, I forgot. But yeah, it's been placed within the view of the camera. You can set how far or how close it is to the camera. So based on that, you're gonna have different effects. Like you can see the plane right now, and the plane is masking some of the buttons. I could decrease this value, and eventually you'll be able to see the UI over here. You have to keep in mind this value should be within the minimum and maximum values of your camera's what do they call it, clipping planes. Yeah, it has to be within the near and far values. So you shouldn't go below 0.3 and you shouldn't go above 1000. Otherwise you might get undesired effects. You have a few more sub options in screen space camera, that's sorting layer and order in layer. Suppose you have more than one canvas that you want to render with the same camera. You can place that canvas on top of this canvas, or you might want to place that canvas behind this canvas. You can use the sorting layer for that and the order in layer for that. Next, world space. This is useful in cases where you might want to place the canvas somewhere within the world space. One example would be to use it as a speech bubble. In that case, you would select world space. Event camera is the camera that will capture certain events like clicks or mouse over or stuff like that. And again, you have sorting layer and order in layer. I'm gonna change this back to screen overlay. One more thing to notice is the Rect Transform. Now in world space mode you have these options open for editing. However, in screen space overlay, and I think in camera as well, yeah, in both of these you don't have this option. You cannot change it. You can only change it in world space. Let's take a look at some of these values. Now first of all, this is not the transform tool, this is a Rect Transform. Let's start from the top. First you have position X, Y and Z. That is just the X, Y and Z values uh, of this canvas. Next you have width and height. This is basically the width and height of the canvas. Now here's the difference between width and height and scale. When you change the width and height, notice that the buttons are still of the same size. They are not being affected. However, when you change the scale, the buttons scale along with the canvas. That's the difference between, in this case you would call it resizing and rescaling. Next, anchors. Anchors basically decide how the UI elements are going to be resized or repositioned when the canvas is resized. The canvas might be resized in cases where, I don't know, the screen size becomes small, or you change the size on your own using this Rect tool. Let me show you a few of the effects of anchors. So currently the anchor is set in the middle of the canvas. Now watch what happens when I make it as big as the canvas. And bear in mind, this anchor is the anchor for this button and this button alone, not for these two. Now when I resize the canvas, you have a different effect. This button is actually resizing along with the canvas. The other two buttons are not. And earlier this button was not resizing. Let me change the anchor back. Now let me add the anchor points to a different position, say around this button. Now when I resize the canvas, you have a more decent resizing functionality. Doesn't resize too fast. Alright, let's change that back. If you don't want to set the anchor to your own custom position, you can use any of the anchor presets. There are many anchor presets to choose from. Each has a different effect. Let me show you one of these effects. Let's go with this. So two anchor points are placed up here and two over here. There are no anchor points placed down. Now watch what happens when I resize the canvas. It increases in width but not in height. The height is still the same. So this is one example of how different positions of the anchor points can have different effects. Next is the pivot point. Okay, before you can actually change the pivot point, you have to make sure that this over here is not set to center. It should be set to pivot, otherwise you might not be able to see, you might not be able to move the pivot point. I had this problem and it actually took me hours to find it out. Finally I decided to go to Unity's forums and I read one person's answer. Alright, so the pivot point basically, it helps you in rotating the object in different ways. So currently the object rotates like this. Maybe you might want to rotate it in a different way, like this. Or maybe you might want to place it here, rotate it like this. So you can place the pivot point just about anywhere and your button is going to rotate based on where you place the pivot point. Next, rotation. I don't think I need to explain this, but yeah, the UI element does rotate within 3D space. Even though you are looking at pretty much a 2D UI, the elements can rotate in 3D space. So you can have different effects if you wish to. And then you have scale, which I already explained to you. The same logic works over here, even though I've selected a button and earlier I had explained to you about width and height of the canvas. The same logic applies here as well. You can increase the width and the text will not be affected, but if you increase the scale value, then the text will actually get stretched. Now here's another interesting feature. Currently I have local selected over here. So if I rotate this object, it's going to rotate within the local space of the button. I can rotate it like this and select global, and then you get this square over here. So the border is not around the button anymore. It's much wider. Then you can scale this object in different ways, and you can also rotate it in various different ways, change the pivot point, have whatever different effect you're looking for. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this before. This position that you see is the distance between the button and the anchor point. Alright, so Rect Transform has two modes other than its normal mode. The first one is blueprint mode and the second is raw edit mode. Blueprint mode basically disables rotation. You can only scale the object, and it still has snapping enabled. If you notice over here, you might see a blue line when I bring this button close to there. You can see a blue line over here. This is called snapping. So you can still do that in blueprint mode, but you cannot rotate the object. Next you have raw edit mode. In raw edit mode, let me show you first in the normal mode. When I change the minimum anchor value, notice these triangles over here. They actually separate. And I can also change the pivot point or the pivot position by changing the pivot X and Y values. When I enable raw edit mode, changing the anchor value actually resizes the button, and changing the pivot point actually repositions the button. Alright, so that's it about the Rect Transform. Let me explain a little bit about the button itself. So a button UI element will have an image script component and a button script component attached to it. The image script just carries whatever graphic is going to be shown for the button. And then you have the button script, which carries all the properties of the button. The first property is interactable. This decides whether or not the button is enabled or disabled. So if I uncheck this, you see the color changed over here. The color that is shown over here is actually the disabled color. If I change this color to red, then you're gonna have this color over here. This button it's currently disabled. That's why it's displaying this color. Next, transition. So buttons have different transition modes. The transition modes are normal, highlighted, pressed, and disabled. Normal would be just normal. You're not hovering over it, you're not clicking it. It's just normal. Highlighted is when you hover over the button. Pressed is, of course, when you press the button, and disabled is when you have disabled the button. You can have different types of transitions. This is color tint. So in color tint, you have target graphic, which is usually picked up from the image script, and you have normal color, which is the normal color when it is not in any other state, like being clicked or being disabled or highlighted. So let's set this to green. Let's set highlighted to, say, orange, and pressed to blue, and then of course disabled is red. Now Let's play the game and wait. Okay, yes, I need to change this to screen space overlay so it shows up on the screen. As you can see, when I hover over the button it becomes yellow, otherwise in its normal state it is green, and when I click the button it's aqua color or cyan, whatever it's called. You also have color multiplier. This basically enhances the color, makes it more bright, I guess. Well, not more bright, but it's a little hard for me to explain this, but it basically amplifies the color. Next you have fade duration. This is how long the color will take to fade when there's a transition from one state to another. So say it is a normal state and you move your mouse over the button. It has to transition from normal to highlighted. So it has to transition from green to orange. Currently the duration set is 0.1, so it's really fast. You can't see the fade actually happening. Let me change this value to 1 and let's play the game and see what happens. Watch as I hover the mouse over the button. The change is very slow. It's not very it's not really fast. That's because I have set the value to 1. You can make it even more slow. I'm not sure why that yellow color is being shown each time, but excuse that. Alright, navigation is a slightly bigger topic, so I'm going to need to leave it for another tutorial. And also on click, this is part of events, so it's again a big topic, so I'll need to explain this in another tutorial. The next transition type is sprite swap. Just like how color tint lets you switch between colors, sprite swap lets you switch between sprites. I'm not going to show you an example because it should be obvious. If you have a couple of different sprites, you can add them here and you can watch the transition happening. Next you have animation. This is actually a very powerful tool. You can animate the UI element based on what state it is in. So again, normal, highlighted, pressed or disabled. The animations are controlled by an animator controller. You can either create one from scratch or you can auto-generate an animation. This will basically create an animator controller and have all 4 states set up from before, and then all you need to do is access those animations and make whatever changes you want. Let's try this. Click auto generate animation and give it the name button.controller. Alright, so here is our animator controller or our animator. This is what it looks like. These are all the states. They have already been set up for you, so you don't need to excuse that. That's my clock. Okay, so you don't need to set this up on your own. However, if you would prefer to create one from scratch, then you can do that as well. Alright, so let's look at the different animations. Select this button because this is the button that has the animator attached to it. Then go into the animation window and you can select any of the animations. We're going to leave normal as it is. We're going to make a change to highlighted. Okay, so first I'm going to add a curve. In this case it's just scale, size. Yeah, I think size delta. Yep. Okay. This is the current size. I want to increase it, so I'll add another keyframe here. Increase the width. And just bring it here. Okay, looks good. So I can save this. Next, I can add an animation for pressed and for disabled, and well, you get the point. Let's play the game and see if this actually does take effect. As you can see, the animation is playing. It's looping. So as long as the mouse cursor is hovering over the button, the animation will keep playing. You can have a lot of different effects, not in just one animation. You can in fact have a lot of different properties changed within one keyframe itself. So there's a whole lot of things that you can do with animations. Similarly, if you want to add the same effect to other buttons as well, rather than going through the process of creating separate animations for each one of them, you can just attach an animator and drag and drop your animator controller into that animator. Do the same thing here. And then before playing the game, change this to animation and this as well. As you can see, you have the same effect on all three buttons. Alright, before we continue, I think I forgot to mention this. Overlapping. Now, in the canvas, the UI elements are displayed from, well, bottom to top. So basically, the item that's at the top is going to be at the back, and the item that is at the bottom is actually going to be in front. Let's see an example. I might need to change the colors of these just so you can see the effect. As you can see, red and yellow are being shown above the purple button. The reason being, the purple button is over here, and below the purple button is the yellow, and below that the red. So if I were to bring red over here, it would actually be above the yellow button as well. This can be useful for many different effects. Alright, next we have text. It's got a Rect Transform as well, and it's also got a text script. Within this component you have many sub options with which you can customize the entire component to your liking. So I'm going to stretch this first a little bit. Let's change the text to "This is my UI element." Okay, let's take a look at some of the properties here. First you have font. You can use any font that you like. However, you'll have to first import the font into your project. Currently I've only got the default font that was imported along with Unity. Next, font style. Bold, italic, bold and italic. I'll change it to bold. Then you have the font size. I'll change this to 48. Next, line spacing. Line spacing is the space between lines, not between characters. For example, if I go to the next line and type "this is the next line," if I increase the line spacing, the line actually moves further apart from the top line. That's what line spacing does. Next you have rich text. This is so you can use emoticons and colors. Next you have alignment. This is basically the alignment of the text, but you're not limited to just left align, center align and right align. You also have top, middle and bottom. So it actually depends upon the size of your text area. Next you have horizontal overflow and vertical overflow. Horizontal overflow wrap basically means whatever I type that is not fitting onto the line anymore is going to go onto the next line. However, if I've selected overflow, watch what happens. It goes out of the boundary of the text element. Vertical overflow, you have two options: truncate and overflow. You already know what overflow does. Truncate will basically either delete that text or just not show it. It's the same thing. Then you have best fit. This will resize the text so it best fits to whatever is the best fit of that element. When you check this, you can select a minimum and maximum size as well. Next you have color. This will be the color of the text. And then you have material. You can create your own material specifically for the UI, and you can apply that over here. When you're creating a material for UI, the shader that you will use is not one of these. You have to select UGUI and select one of these shaders. I'm going to select default font. You have many more options over here. I'm not going to explain these. You'll have to check them out yourself. Change this color to green. And then apply this material over here. So it applies that color. It actually is mixing the color, I think. Yeah. Alright, so that is the text element. Next you have image. As the name suggests, it is used to display an image. You have a couple of different options over here. One is source image. This is what image you want to display. I've selected this image. Next you have color. This is what tint you want to apply to that image. You can either do it from here, or you can create a material and apply that. Well, I need to make some changes there. I think it's because I had selected font. Let's try default. Yep, there it is. Next you have image type. First of all, you have simple. This basically just stretches out the image as big as the element is. Within this you have a sub option called preserve aspect. This basically makes the image big enough that it does not uh, go out of the boundaries of this element. However, while doing that, it will still maintain its original aspect ratio. Let me show you what I mean. So currently this image has resized and it's fit over here. Watch the effect as I change the size of the element. It's maintaining a certain aspect ratio. However, it's still not going out of the bounds of the element. Next you have set native size. This is the original size of the image. Alright, so that's simple. Next you have sliced. This uses the new 9 slice method of Unity. Basically what 9 slice is, how do I explain this? Okay, 9 sliced divides your sprite or your picture into 9 pieces, and the middle piece is the main content. The outer piece, the outer 8 pieces, they are gonna be the border of the picture basically. So what happens in that case is when you enlarge an element that's using a picture that has been 9 sliced, I guess, the border is not going to stretch and it won't get pixelated. The border won't have any effect. It's the main middle picture that's going to stretch. In order to use the 9 slice method, you have to select sprite editor and select a border. Let me show you how exactly it looks. Alright, so it might be a little hard to see over here, but just try. Okay, so these outer 8 squares represent the border, and this is the main portion that if needs to be stretched will get stretched. Let me change this. There. So these are our outer borders and this is the main portion of the image. I'm going to click apply, and as you can see, the borders and the image. You have an option here, fill center. If you uncheck this, only the border will be used and not the middle portion of the image. This can be very useful in cases where you want to manipulate borders and use those borders for some other use. Like, I don't know, maybe apply it to this, or even apply it to this text element. I don't know, it's just an example. There. Let's check this. Next, you have tiled. As the name suggests, the image is going to be tiled. Currently this is really small, so you can't notice a lot of tiling in it, but if it was a small image that you're using, there would be a lot of tiling. There, you can see it. Alright, next, filled. Filled has a few more sub options. The first is fill method. This is how the image is being filled into this element, horizontally, vertically, or radial 90, radial 180, or radial 360. Let me show you what these do. Okay, in order to show you that, I'll need to explain a few of these as well. Fill origin, that's where the fill starts from. You can select left or right, but that is for horizontal. In the case of vertical, you'll have bottom or top, and in the case of radial and radial 90, radial 180 and all, you'll have different options. Change back to horizontal. Let me change this fill amount and show you what happens. Let me uncheck this. So bear in mind the fill origin is left. If I reduce this amount, only this much portion is filled. So take it as a percentage of some sort, this value, and I guess you can say this is 33%. 33% of that element is filled. Okay, let's see from the right side. So the fill is actually starting from the right side and only this much percentage is filled up. Then you have vertical, which is first from the bottom and then from the top. Next you have radial 90. So if you know geometry, then you know what a 90-degree angle is. So take the fill origin, let's say from this point. Watch what happens when I reduce this value. It's actually reducing but going at a 90-degree angle. It's here, this is the effect in the case of bottom left. You have top left and top right and so on. Then you have radial 180. So 180 would be like this. So if it starts at the bottom, then there. And if it starts at the left, then this is the effect. And it goes on. Next you have radial 360. If it starts from the bottom, it's going to go and stop there. Similarly you have from the right and top and so on. Now in radial 360 you actually have the option to set it as clockwise or anti-clockwise. You have clockwise checked right now and that's why it is turning like this. If I uncheck clockwise, turns in another direction. So that concludes part 1 of this tutorial. Stay tuned for more. I hope this tutorial was helpful. Do check out these other videos as well. The video on the top left teaches you about layers and layer masking. The video on the top right teaches you about fixing object rotation, and the video on the bottom left teaches you how to use a wheel collider. I'm also accepting donations, so if you would like to help me out, you can send your donations to my PayPal email address, which is mentioned on the screen and in the description down below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Leave your comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.
Is he even still the same? Claiming lost boys, but we never seen him main. Out on cover, now on album when he get the chance to hang. Like, damn, 134. Niggas acting like I never been through them doors. Moved uptown and I rocked a little red. Niggas asking if I'm raw cause I'm out in Hempstead. Like, shit, who are you? Entourage member or